switch to Arabic. Ziad is saying, allow me first to welcome all the participants in this workshop. This workshops is held in the framework of the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. It was supposed theoretically to be held face-to-face in New York, and this is a side event of the forum. However, uh, since we're still facing the COVID-19 pandemic, we couldn't meet face to face. This workshop is organized by ANND and its partners, working together on the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda. ANND has many partners, regional partners and regional networks, the Arab Network for Handicaps and people with special needs. Kauthar, the Arab Network for the Democracy of the Elections, and many other networks. This workshop aims to tackle different challenges in the Arab region, mainly in terms of implementing SDGs, the SDGs and the Agenda 2030 agenda. We will be mainly stressing on the paradigm shift, and this is the main title of this session. We held an Arab regional forum organized by ESCWA and the League of Arab States while preparing for this forum. And as civil society organizations and NGOs and as a network, we have organized this Arab forum, and during that Arab forum, we have discussed many topics, many problems faced by the Arab region, especially after the Arab Spring and after the many transformations in the region. Some of them reflect the of people to move from a period to another, from a reality to another. In addition to that, the has faced the COVID-19 pandemic and its aftermath, not only on the health sector, but as well on the educational sector, on the economic situation related to the huge increase in the numbers of people living in dire poverty, number of vulnerable and marginalized people, and number of unemployed people as well. In that framework, there was a declaration published by the ANND, and that was translated in the intergovernmental forum, and now discussing that in the high level political forum. We are stressing on the importance of having this paradigm shift. The socio-economic situation in the Arab region requires bold, and these go beyond the reform measures. There should be a drastic change. The 2030 agenda was published in 2015, and its main title was Changing Our World, or the main logo was to change our world. So this is a transformational plan. It's not only about reforms. There are many structural problems, poverty, unemployment, social marginalization, vulnerability. The, this has many repercussions and aftermath, leading to many challenges. And this is being reflected the regime, hence the importance of having this paradigm change. There are many and problems that the people in the region are facing today in terms of this paradigm shift. This starts with main points, six main titles, and these six titles are practically what we are going to discuss through our various speakers and colleagues of mine participating in this workshop. when we talk about paradigm shift, we cannot but talk about the role of the public sector. And it appeared that after decades and decades of dismantling public institutions, this had many repercussions, many dangerous repercussions on the society, dealing with this free market policy and everything it led to had many reflections, many repercussions on the socio-economic situation. But it appeared that linking both paradigms is not really accurate, and hence the importance of talking about the role of public institutions. Another topic, another important point, uh, we should review the macroeconomic policies and approaches, productivity, and how we shifted more towards a service or a rentier economy rather than a productive economy, led to more and more disparities in salaries and revenues, and our region became one of the regions that suffers the most from inequality and from this small minority that is holding the wealth, and this is increasing more and more the number of marginalized people. So this is the trend we are witnessing in our region, and we are witnessing these disparities inside the same state, but between different countries as well. The third important topic is governance. In fact, there are many economic and social models to be discussed, but governance is very important as well. It is very important to think about the institutional aspect that is going to serve the 2050, the 2030 agenda on the one hand. However, we should look as well at this institutional dimension or aspect that should be extremely transparent, that should promote accountability and the Pacific transfer of authority in addition to efficient institutions. The most important thing for us in the Arab region is to go back to the rule of law and stress on the importance of the rule of law. And we know that the law is not always respected in our region. One other topic, the fourth point that is very important as well, peace and security. In the 2030 agenda, there are many disparities, if we could say so, between what the declaration says about prerequisites. So, peace and security are prerequisites for sustainable development, and peace is considered uh, as part of the security situation, if we could say so. It talks as well about occupations, about conflicts, armed conflicts. However, in the SDGs, we hear about peaceful societies and many other expressions that are below what is required. And we know that in our region, we have many conflicts, armed conflicts, and crises that have the repercussions on the entire region. And we have the occupation as well that has its repercussions on the region. This is leading not only to aftermath on the security and the political situation, but this is leading as well to people moving. We have more refugees, more displaced, and more migrants. Another point as well, the multi-stakeholder partnership. And this figures in the 2030 agenda, and this is considered as a prerequisite. No state, no entity, no party can assume the responsibility of implementing as the SDGs without this multi-stakeholder partnership. We're talking mainly about the public-private partnership, about this partnership with the private sector that plays a major role in the development in the region. And we cannot talk about that without talking about private sector accountability. What are the tools, the instruments, the criteria used to promote the accountability of the private sector so that the sector becomes a very important partner? How to increase this resilience as well and this flexibility? it is very important as well to talk about the civil society that should be a major partner in the development, mainly in policy drafting, public policy drafting in terms as well of implementation. And this region sometimes faces some strong reactions, or the civil society in the region is faced with some strong reactions in our countries in certain cases. One last thing, inequalities. Decades and decades ago, we've been reading reports that talk about inequalities in the region, these strong inequalities, and inequalities have many many reflections. We cannot, of course, but think about the disparities in revenues and the salaries, the disproportionate distribution of wealth. This applies to the region, of course. However, we talk as well about the social aspects and the gender aspects of these disparities and inequalities in the Arab region. There are gender related inequalities, and we know that our region suffers from many facets of inequalities, many forms of inequalities on more than one level. Although the participation of women in the political life and the economic life and in more than one field has been pioneer. However, the participation of women in decision making, in policy making, and in running, if we could say so, or managing the economy or the political life is still very limited, or is limited to a very few number of women. Some women are members of the parliament, some women are appointed as decision makers, or in some public administrations. So these are the main axes to be discussed, and this, in our opinion, these, in our opinion, are one of the most important challenges and obstacles to the implementation of the 2030 agenda. We will be tackling most of these topics during today's panels and today's sessions. We have today five speakers, five main panelists. The first speaker is Mrs. Karima Al-Khoury from the Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, ESCWA. She has been working for more than 20 years in the field of development. She's been working with the UNDP and now with the ESCWA, and she is currently the coordinator of the 2030 agenda and the SDGs in the SQA, and she was in charge of preparing for the political forum for years in cooperation with the League of Arab States, and we know that the civil society organizations have been participating as well in that work stream. She will be talking about the Arab Forum on Sustainable Development. After that, we'll give the floor to Zena Abla. She is a researcher in the economic and social field. She's one of the partners of ANND, and she will be talking about the role of the private sector, mainly in the development, and how can we ensure the accountability of the private sector, what are the tools that can be used. After that, we will be talking about peace and security and stability in the region with our colleague, Mr. Rabia Nasser from the Syrian Center for Policy Research, head of the Syrian Center for Policy Research. He is as well one of the members and the partners of ANND. He will be talking about the situation in the region amid these conflicts and amid this instability. After that, we'll give the floor to Mr. Nasser Abdel Karim, who is a professor of financial economics. He is as well one of the prominent researchers that have dealt with the NND. He will be talking about a case study related to the occupation and to Palestine and how this affected and affects development. And last but not least, we will give the floor to our colleague Lina Abu Habib, who is a well-known figure, mainly in terms of defending all sorts of discrimination or against women. So she is one of the pioneers in the field of facing these discriminations. She is the interim director of the Asbury Institute for Civil Society and Citizenship at the American University of Beirut. She will be talking about inequalities, mainly about social and gender inequalities. We will start directly with the first speaker, Mrs. Karim Al-Khoury. Uh, if you allow us, we will start with Mrs. Karim Al-Khoury. You each have 10 minutes for your presentations before giving the floor to the attendees and the participants. Mrs. Karim Al-Khoury, the floor is yours. We are extremely delighted to have you among us. Karima, can you hear us? Yes. I will be speaking in Arabic. Allow me first, in the name of ASQA, to thank ANND for inviting us to talk about what we worked in the Arab Forum on Sustainable Development that was organized by ASQA with the League of Arab States and different UN agencies in last March. And we discussed the post-COVID sustainable development goals. We have reviewed the pandemic and how it affected sustainable development in the region. We have talked as well about the different approaches aimed at promoting resilience, mainly after the COVID-19 pandemic, and how we can move towards implementing the SDGs and the 2030 agenda. There were many messages that were sent to the high-level political forum. Before delving into the details of these messages, I have some figures. 1,650 participants from 21 Arab states and more than 50 non-Arab states, 3 days of work, 16 sessions, plenary sessions, 21 sessions related to different topics. So we held three different preparation meetings and we have worked with different CSOs on that. We were clearly able to see how much everyone had the need to work in order to alleviate the aftermath of COVID-19 pandemic on the most vulnerable, mainly through practical steps in cooperation with different stakeholders. The participants have agreed on a set of priorities in the framework, mainly related to having structural reforms on social protection systems and regimes in order to promote equality, inclusiveness, and they talked as well about the importance of mainly helping the most vulnerable, those workers working in the informal and in the formal sector, how we can work in order to promote the sustainability of these steps. The forum called as well to promote resilience projects, mainly among countries and the regions that face food security, how we can support the small landowners and small farmers. We have reviewed some specific goals in particular, and there are many messages that are related to different SDGs, and we have reviewed the 9 of the SDGs, and we have added today SDG 5 since it is very important for the region. We have agreed as well on the importance of promoting political engagement and commitment, and the importance of working proactively, working on preemptive measures in the health sector, promote sustainable development development, mainly in terms of SDG 3. We stressed as well on the importance of mental health as a major part of security. Uh, we stressed as well on the importance of having inclusive policies, changing the educational policies as well, include everyone, promote equality, develop electronic platform, increase the training opportunities and the professional opportunities for young men and women in order to be more productive. We talked as well about access of everyone to technology equally, about accelerating digital transformation in the public and private sectors in order to promote the sustainability of business. We've talked about as well development, about research and the development and working on that field. Regarding the private sector, the forum called for supporting SMEs in order to help them recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. It called for promoting the public-private partnership based on transparency and based on linking different work strategies to SDGs. Regarding women empowerment and amidst everything the women are suffering from in the Arab region and everywhere across the world, mainly during the pandemic, the forum stressed on the importance of promoting the political commitment to promote gender equalities and to develop the legal framework that can put an end to all gender discrimination, mainly discrimination against and violence against women and girls, and that can promote the participation of women, in public life. We've talked about the importance of participate or of helping women engage in the employment sector, and we've called to promote different chances for women and girls to work remotely. Different participants called to share the best experiences, mainly in terms of governance and migration governance. And we've talked about the most vulnerable people that are suffering from these waves of migration. We've talked about ensuring universal health coverage to everyone, justice mainly to laborers, in addition to the basic services. And we've talked about the importance of including different migrants and decision making. Regarding the implementation tools, different participants agreed to mobilize the national resources and to have more compatibility between the budgets, local budgets, and between the SDGs and the different development agendas locally and internationally in order to face the repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic. There are many steps that can help, mainly in terms of policy cohesion, work in the framework of the Sendai framework, the Paris Agreement, and the SDGs, promote the sustainable development and the inclusive and comprehensive development, promote green development as well. In light of the different gaps we've been witnessing in the region, and after looking at the different data, we have agreed on the necessity of developing the different national dashboards or data dashboards in different countries and build on what has been done during the COVID-19 pandemic with the aim of bridging the gaps related to the lack of data, so that we have so that we respect international standards. The platform talked about the importance of paradigm shift, and this requires enlarging the public or the civil sphere, include the different local authorities and the implementation of plans and promoting human rights, promoting the rights, the role of parliaments, of monitoring institutions in order to commitment at all levels to end the wars, occupation, conflicts, linking recovery, short-term recovery to long-term recovery were all discussed as well. In terms of justice and the solidarity between countries, the forum asked for a fair and just distribution of COVID-19 vaccines, which will eventually affect the way countries can recover from the pandemic on different levels. The forum asked as well to tackle the burden of debts. So debts are burdening countries of the region, and the forum called for promoting the financing or funding of development, in addition to finding flexible ways in order to face these challenges. These are in brief the major recommendations of the forum. All meetings that discussed inequality, discussed inequalities and the necessity of promoting equality and bridging the gaps related to inequalities. They all tackled about the importance of promoting health coverage, about promoting inclusiveness, gender equality, supporting SMEs, small, the importance of the inclusiveness of migrants, and working between countries as well, sharing experiences between countries. I couldn't discuss in details everything that was discussed during the forum. This is why I would like to ask you to read the entire report, and you can check the sessions that are to invite you to attend as well the HLPF that will be held and on Wednesday, July 14, from 4 to 5:30 Beirut time. Thank you again, and I wish you success.
Thank you, Mrs. Karima, for giving us the brief overview of the results of the forum that was held and that were submitted to the New York meeting. Karima, we have a question. Please write it down, and then during the Q&A session, we would like you to answer it. The question is as follows. From Mr. Mohamed Sawi, who says, the deliverables respond to the challenges in general. However, they only provide a description. What are the actual steps that will allow us to actually face these challenges and these discrepancies? I would like now to give the floor to Mrs. Zeina Abla, who's going to talk to us about the role of the private sector and the development in the Arab world, as well as the accountability methods. What are the tools and the mechanisms to hold the private sector accountable? 10 minutes. Hi, everyone. I might need to share a presentation if possible. Can you allow me to do so, because I don't have permission? We can see the presentation, as Ziad said. I have a question. My name is, I am from Iraq. I have a question for Mrs. Karima. Did Iraq take part in the forum? Can we keep the questions until after all the interventions are done, and then we will answer your question, ma'am, because we've given the floor to Zeina now. So can you see the presentation? Yes. Hello again. I'm going to talk about the private sector, which became a key partner in the development process, especially in Agenda 2030, the private sector in our region and the role it plays in the development process. What is the understanding and what is the role of the private sector in the region? What are its characteristics? What is its performance? And what are its impediments on the macro level, which hamper its role in the development process, in order for us to understand the mechanisms of holding this private sector accountable in the future? I'd like to review what the private sector is. As Milton said in the 1970s, the business of business is business. So its role is to gather capitals, resources, develop some ideas which lead to a certain production, and its objective is to make money. This is a key understanding of the private sector. Within this process should be productive, lead to create new things and give an added value to the economy. At the same time, it has to be fair, it has to ensure networking to develop properly, and this is a process that takes place by using natural resources, even if that is not always clear. It starts with the land and using lands, labor, resources as well. But the land is the first factor of production, especially in economy. These are matters that are reflected in Agenda 2030 as standards of development and criteria for development. They allow us to understand the role of the private sector in development. The first indicator, the macro indicator in the Arab world, is private investment. Which shows us the ability of economy to grow and develop because of the role of the private sector. So its percentage to the GDP is rather low compared with other countries. And even though it fluctuated and improved over time as it related to the oil prices, however, during the last decade or 2 decades, we've seen that this percentage was rather low. If we look at the characteristics of the private sector, we can notice that the majority of Arab institutions are national institutions. 80% of them are family-owned enterprises. Their ownership is concentrated even in large enterprises. There is an absence of multinationals, corporations, or their numbers are extremely limited and present only in large economies. The Arab private sector size is rather low. The majority of enterprises are small to micro. There are some giant enterprises with the absence of medium-sized corporations, and we lack information on the ability of small enterprises to grow to medium-sized ones, which impedes their development and the development of the economy in turn. The informal sector is extensive in the region. 91% of informal enterprises are also family-owned. We are the second region to create job opportunities in the informal sector, which goes to show the absence of incentives to the private sector to move from the informal to the formal sector. The private sector also faces great difficulty in creating more value and productivity. The percentage of corporations working in the knowledge sector is limited. High-tech corporations are also limited in terms of number, in spite of some of the efforts made in Morocco. However, these advancement efforts are still nascent and limited. The performance of this private sector is low when it comes to productivity. The productivity is low, and the ability to create development and growth is also limited. Production and other factors are limited due to several reasons, given the absence of investments in technology innovation, even in rather rich countries in the region. This is related to oil, to the countries and governments spending, as well as different phases. The World Bank survey of corporations working in services and industry, the Middle East region, includes a very low number of research enterprises and innovation enterprises. If we were to measure the role of the private sector in creating job opportunities, we notice that the region faces the largest percentage of unemployed persons. The formal private sector provides less than a quarter of job opportunities, whereas the public sector is in control. The majority of job opportunities are present in the informal sector. There are also small enterprises that might create a solution. However, there are no studies to prove that these small enterprises are actually capable of ensuring sustainability and create the required number of job opportunities. It is true that awareness is increasing on the role of the private sector and its impact on nature and environment. However, the private sector still follow the same extractive technologies. We are still far from reproduction and the circular economy in the areas where there are some laws on environmental impact assessment or other mechanisms to organize this process. We still realize that they are still modest and are not followed up on. There are laws on environmental impact assessment. However, this law ticks a certain box without understanding to what extent it is implemented or not. We should talk about the obstacles or impediments on the macro level. This requires extensive research. When it comes to the macro level, there are, as Ziad was saying, macroeconomic or policies that stifle private sector's dynamism. The fiscal monetary policy myths lead to curbing the private sector investment. There are also industrial policies that remain somewhat rhetoric and are only used to or by a specific number of enterprises to create a certain profitability for some sectors rather than creating a dynamism or economic trend towards achieving better productivity. This is mainly also due to the shape of economies in the Arab region that resemble basically crony capitalism, which create a link between the governments and the private sector. It is available throughout the world. However, it's prominent in our area. There are studies that show the difficulty to allow the entrance of new companies and enterprises in these sectors, which are capable of controlling the creation of job opportunities and work. The large corporations that have political ties also control the professional relationships and economic relationships. They discourage firms from investing, and we reduce thereby the dynamism of the private sector and its role. In addition, there are external factors that limit the role of the private sector in development, which are the agreements and investment agreements that are made due to geopolitical reasons. They often lack proper studies, especially when it comes to their impact on relevant sectors. They limit the ability of the private sector to take part in the global value chains and to strengthen its production capabilities. How can we hold the private sector accountable? Several mechanisms are available, starting with Agenda 2030 and the objectives that were drafted, especially targets or goals, the specific goals for the private sector. However, it is important for us to create a better understanding of the private sector, what it stands for, and how we can ensure it plays its original role in being creative, innovative, and to create new job opportunities, decent job opportunities. This also needs to take into account the power structures between the political power and the distribution of power in the private sector. Finally, we cannot hold the private sector accountable, especially in our region, without having government policies that direct this private sector towards a development process, either through agreements, legislations, or by using the media. It is important to redirect the private sector towards its role in the development process. The civil society organizations need to also play their role to push towards this redirection and to maintain accountability. Thank you. Thank you, Zena, for this presentation. I'm not going to make any comments, but I will move directly to Rabia Nasser from the Syrian Center for Policy Studies. Rabia, you're smiling because I didn't get the center's name properly, correct? Thank you all for allowing me this opportunity. I will try to cover 5 types of conflict-related discrepancies, or this is a word that is subpar related to the impact of conflicts. We're not talking about disparities, but rather injustice, unfairness, because disparity might indicate a small difference in the services and the other aspects. With regards to the conflict, allow me to say that SDGs are being criticized in these fora in order to say that the approach is not logical. It's as if we're in a sinking ship and we're looking at the drinking water that we still have left, forgetting about the sinking ship. Universal health services, for example. We're talking at least about the Arab world, about countries such as Syria, Iraq, Palestine, Yemen, Libya, Sudan as well, that are suffering from the repercussions of the conflicts that destroyed the infrastructure and leave an impact on the neighboring countries and threatening the socioeconomic and political structure. And we're talking about expanding health coverage. My presentation and my intervention today will show that we have yet to address the root causes. I'm going to talk about the disparities and cover the subject gradually. The first, injustice or disparity. The global conflict has affected the region, Israel's occupation of Palestine and its repercussions and the settlement, the expansion, the constant wars that are supported by international countries. There are discrepancies and disparities according to the international law. The United Nations talk about the sustainable goals and the development goals as if it is not related to the Security Council, knowing that the forces present and represented in the Security Council of the United Nations have supported the Syrian regime or other regimes. So there is also the direct occupation of Palestine or Iraq and the interference of military powers through political veto. This means that we are ignoring what's happening in the region. We want to improve indicators regardless of the problems that we are facing. Competition does not lead to improving services in the different regions. Rather, they sustain the armed conflict. The other repercussion of this international injustice is how development, economic, and the trade agreements are signed. They are unfair. We're not talking about any change in these policies. no one's addressing more fairness in economic agreements or freedom of movement, for example. A conflict might break out between Egypt and Ethiopia, for example. More than 200 million persons might be involved in war between two countries, and the international response is shameful. This is the new system that allow countries and regional countries to do all forms of violations, including military intervention, to preserve uh, regimes, oppressive regimes in the region. I think we cannot disregard the fact that the region needs to improve the paradigm. There are forces present. Mr. Jassim, please make sure that your microphone is on mute. The conflict in Syria, Libya, and Yemen have been widely documented, and we're talking about complex conflicts that will be sustained because we lack any solution. The right to life is absent. More than 700, 800,000 people were killed. Even 1 million people were killed. Everyone knew what was happening in Rwanda. Everyone knows what's happening in these countries on a daily basis. And the forces doing these violations are normalizing their existence in this region, and as if their behavior is internationally accepted. We have lost the right to life and the right to protection for persons living in some countries such as Syria, and the authorities in other countries are using or abusing this existence in order to do something similar and threaten their citizens, saying, do you want to become like Syria, to limit the freedom of expression and this freedom space that were already limited when it comes to the different rights. What's happening in this field when it's with regards to the humanitarian discrepancy and differences? The refugees are second or third class citizens, of course, but according to the international law, they are deprived from basic human rights. So this human discrepancy is existential and is dangerous, and it justifies the lack of right to life. As a result of the current conflicts, the repercussion on other countries, the discrepancies were present, but after conflicts, we lost the ability for indirect impact. The different communities gather in Lebanon, in Baghdad, in Algeria, after all the failures, after the conflicts. Also, the power remains as is, in the same conditions and in the same policies. Some countries, the main methodology and political oppression remains the absence of any form of participation with the support of foreign powers. And this foreign support is one of the key factors why societies and the communities are stifled. The regime in Syria played a prominent role in destroying society and the community, and still there is to hold elections. We're talking about a region that might blow up in the near future, and still we lack any UN or civil society strategy to counter these grave challenges. I'd like to talk about another social issue, which is political dimension of identities. The different ethnicities, political affiliation, and religious affiliation are being abused. There are a grave clashes globally. There was an investment in the hatred rhetoric, and without us feeling any reaction globally, extremism is widespread without any counter rhetoric to alleviate and to reduce this hatred speech. This is present either in our region and in the West. These matters lead to the dismantling of the social fabric without having any strategies to face them. Political oppression is used to control the hatred speech. Social discrepancy is also related to education, and before COVID-19, conflict zones and conflict areas have lost the ability to enroll everyone in education. Children are learning hatred and the rejection of the other, which leads to disintegrating the collective memory, either in the human capital or when it comes to social relations. This is a natural reaction towards the conflicts. However, we are unable to maintain social relations between the different people and communities in this world, in this area of the world. I'm trying to be as brief as possible, and we can discuss them later on. With regards to the economy, one of the matters of the economy are the economies of war, and using the resources of the region in war, in destroying infrastructure, in drugs, in stealing the property of others. Therefore, a conflict is a magical solution for increased injustice, and it does not require any justification. It allows the theft of accumulated resources for the at the expense of some and in the interest of others. Most of them are international investors. These opportunities were created in a short time frame, and in addition to the theft and the issues that took place, the same abusive policies based on transforming wealth from or stealing wealth from the community to a feudal system still remain in Lebanon. For example, banks decided not to disburse the deposits to the depositors, and the state took over them, and this happened in 2 weeks, and it contradicts all development indicators, as well as the right to citizens to have access to their deposits. in order to consume in Lebanon, you either need to sell your property or you need assistance. Who will buy them? I need you to summarize, Rabia. I'm concluding, yes. As a result of this newfound poverty compounded by COVID, wealth started to be redistributed. We still unable to measure this redistribution, either when it comes to political oppression, injustice, the security and military spending. The region is moving quickly towards more destruction, more disintegration, and these are the current indicators. Therefore, this strategy should not focus on the indicators, but trying to find the mechanisms and institutions that are capable of facing these repercussions. Thank you.
What you were trying to say is exactly what I started by saying. So this dichotomy, if you could say so, between SDG 16, peaceful societies, and what peace and security mean in the declaration. So we feel that the agenda here is softer, if we could say so, in the face of these multidimensional and these problems that have international dimensions, of course. A case study about Palestine and the occupation from Nasser. I will take 10 minutes only. I would like to thank ANND. Thank you for all the speakers. I have two brief comments. Honestly, beyond the development rhetoric, I am against what Friedman says about development, and I'm against as well this 2030 agenda and these SDGs that are, in my opinion, reflections that are drifting away from the main pillars, the main components, mainly related to equality, social equality, and the region. So beyond that, I will talk directly about Palestine. Our friend Rabia talked about conflicts. We are not only suffering from a conflict, we have a vulnerable economy, we're living under occupation. So we're going through an occupation, a struggle, not only a conflict. So this is more than a conflict, and the destructive repercussions of the struggle or occupation is wider than the conflict. In Palestine, the occupation interferes in any development effort. Let us say we are talking about development being an indicator, considering that development is linked to resilience, to economic resilience, to people's resilience and ability to persist, to stay in their lands. If we assume that improving their livelihoods and their being for them to be able to resist the occupation, this is for us perhaps the definition of development. We cannot talk about development under occupation. We have objectives related, of course, to well-being, to livelihoods, but as well to resisting the occupation. So we therefore need to truly work on changing our life, economic, educational, social aspects of life. We cannot talk about economic well-being and talk about economic gains, if you could say so, without talking about the political gains. The true door that we can open towards development in Palestine is to face the occupation in Palestine, of course. As long as we have occupation, we will always have something that hinders development. We can talk about de-development. Even if there are some progress made, the Israeli occupation would rid that measure or that improvement of its meaning. So our approach to development is related either to empowerment and resilience, um, or more than traditional measurements or indicators used by the World Bank or the ESCWA. I think that when we talk about development, about empowerment, about resilience, we talk about facing vulnerability and inequalities. And what is creating inequalities is the occupation. The occupation is stealing our lands, our wealth, our resources, our lands like the Aghwar region. So all these regions are controlled by the occupation, all the different checkpoints as well, and the different border crossings are controlled as well by the occupation. Even the customs, the fiscal policies are controlled by the occupation. So we have the same customs policy or customs systems with the occupation, and this is what truly hindered our resilience, our empowerment in Palestine. We've been facing problems as well because of the trade. 80 or 90% of our exports go to the occupation, to the Israeli occupation, and we've been facing problems in unemployment as well. Many people as well, many employees work under occupation. Of course, the revenues of their work comes back to our lands. However, we're still facing these burdens, if we could say so. We are always prone, if you could say so, to intervention. We're prone to these challenges. We're facing unemployment, high unemployment rates, and the figures we have now and the data we have now might not be accurate. We have another problem as well that we're facing in Palestine, uh, which is the problem related to the trade. We of course have as well problems with royalties, and we know who is truly gaining from this trade. We are so we are facing that problem as well, and the occupation is controlling huge amounts of these revenues, if you could say so, from the trade. Israel is punishing and sanctioning, if you could say so, Palestinians supported by some European allies and by the US. This happened in 2018, 2019, and in some cases, the Palestinian Authority didn't even have enough money to pay the salaries of its public employees. This led to a poor recovery. It was impossible to recover from any crisis. Okay, the occupation is a deep-rooted structural crisis, but there are some emergency crises such as the attack against Gaza or even the COVID-19 pandemic. So we are so vulnerable that we are unable to face these emergencies, or we are unable to recover from the repercussions of these emergencies. There was a report that was published yesterday talking about the fact that there are more than $570 million in terms of losses after the attack against Gaza. Can you imagine? We have to allocate that much money to be able to recover from what happened and from the attack on Gaza. The same applies to the COVID-19 pandemic. There were many losses in Palestine, around $3 billion dollars of losses. The Palestinian Authority couldn't do anything in order to help people face the different repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic. Why? Because the Palestinian Authority cannot control its revenues. Why? Because of the occupation that is controlling different aspects of people's lives. SMEs and MSMEs did not receive any assistance. The Palestinian government gave or allocated around $1 million for all for all its citizens in order to face the pandemic, which is nothing. There are other states that have allocated billions and billions of dollars ever. So I can say that the Palestinian case is quite critical, quite sensitive. We always say that there is occupation, yes, but at the same time, we need to stay here. And for us to stay here, we should be resilient enough, empowered enough, and we should spare no efforts, if you could say so, in order to uh, promote that resistance. Of course, we need these crises and conflicts to end if we truly want to work on the development path. However, these objectives are hard to implement now. Thank you, Doctor. We're talking about Palestine in order to stress on the fact that uh, 2030 agenda is not limited to SDG 16. We have in fact stressed on conflicts, armed conflicts, but the question of occupation is extremely important as well. And it is extremely important to look at the case study of Palestine to see these disparities between the theory and the practice, if you could say so. Mrs. Lina, the floor is yours. You can speak in English or in Arabic. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Ziad. I would like to thank you for inviting me to participate in that meeting. I will not take much time, but I would like to talk about the disparities and inequalities, which is a cross sector, if you could say so, cross conflicts, cross crisis, cross governance patterns in the Arab region. What was the impact of all these accumulated crises on these disparities? And I will conclude by talking about rather an empowering note, not a positive note, but an empowering note. What are the resistance movements that are taking place? And I will be brief. I won't take more than 10 minutes. So, based on the event held about in France about the Generation Equality Forum, and between this and what we're organizing today, that meeting was called by UN Women, the Mexican government, and the French government, in addition to civil society across the world. Mainly women civil society organizations. Only countries that have been truly committed to equality have participated in that forum. No Arab country was participating in that meeting, and we can say that for the first time, Arab countries and Arab leaders did not get the chance to sit on that round table and talk about achievements that they did not make. So they weren't given the chance to lie about what they're doing. Anyway, that forum discussed the way of funding different women organizations working on the ground without going through different economies or bureaucracy, if you could say so, without going through these different stages. Um, $60 billion dollar of funding for women organizations working on the ground. Why am I talking about that? Because it appeared clearly during the COVID-19 pandemic, after that, based on the different wars and conflicts that we've been facing, and based on these failed economies, we have seen that these had a huge impact on inequalities, but this wasn't surprising. So, what are the main outcomes if we were to define them? First of all, and this is something that most of the country's economies do not look at, which is the unpaid labor or job. So, jobs or work that women do, migrant workers, migrant women, displaced women do without getting paid for that. These are the care prices. This was a major component that was discussed. This was a major problematic and problem in our countries and in all world countries. It's not an outcome or a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, but it is about the accumulation of different problems: civil status laws, customs, traditions, patriarchal societies. All these led to this pattern of unpaid care service, unpaid labor, if you could say so. At the same time, no laws have been promulgated to acknowledge these services. And whenever we are facing these problems as women organizations, the only example we can give is the following. Imagine that women would go on a strike for 3 days. They would refuse to do anything. And let us see how life would go on, how school work would go on, etc. So these care services were extremely important. There were three-dimensional levels inside the households. Workers at home and women working in the health sectors. We have seen how in Lebanon they started laughing at nurses, women nurses, in the beginning, mainly when nurses started asking for them to be granted homes or houses and apartments next to the hospitals they work in, so that they wouldn't have to come and go to their houses. And put their families at risk. Another thing, violence against women and against other categories. This is not the result or the outcome of the pandemic. The entire system is using violence, gender-based violence, sexual and sexist violence against the women. This is not the result of war or pandemics. This is present. This has been present for so long, but it has increased, if you could say so, during the war or during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we've seen such trends increasing during the pandemic, but gender-based violence wasn't the result of the pandemic. We know that in 2020, six women were killed by their husbands during the first 6 months of the year. Another topic, all social topics had more repercussions or strong repercussions on women: livelihoods, work, labor, uh, dire poverty, and many other economic many other problems that had their economic repercussions on women more than others. We should add to those many other vulnerable groups that aren't always seen and that are pioneers, if we could say so, or that are at the forefront of those suffering from the repercussions, the LGBTI community, sex workers, migrants, women and women migrants. So these are vulnerable groups. One last aspect before talking about the forms of resistance is related to the reaction of our regimes that had nothing to do with democracy. On the contrary, they tried to shut the voices of people who were trying to talk about these problems. I would like to talk here about Asma Abdel Fattah, who has been detained for the past 2 years. She has been a victim of violence. Muzen Hassan, who hasn't been able to travel for years, and Sarah Hijazi, who committed the suicide because of the way she was mistreated in prison, and they are all Egyptians. What we have witnessed during that period has been so strong and so compelling, if we could say so. We have we have seen new forms of organization, and I think that these topics have been discussed a lot recently, mainly during the pandemic, and this helped to break the stigma and many taboos. For the first time during the past 2 years, we have heard the voices of the LGBTI community outside, of course, the private sphere, their voices, or they started asking not only for reforms, but for a paradigm shift. This patriarchal society or community cannot continue to be as it is, and we should start breaking that. Why? Because this society is shutting these people's voices. It's not acknowledging the presence of many groups, and because we're all considered as third, fourth, fifth category or classes in society. These voices have been amplified, and we have had the feminist recovery plan, which is not a utopia. It includes many tangible pillars and components. First of all, an economy that takes into account care services under all its forms. So, whether people are doing that inside their households or in the employment sector, our societies do not acknowledge that they rely on care services without valuing these services. And this is quite like slavery. People are doing a certain job, a certain work. They are either not valued or valued way less than they should be. This is the first thing we should acknowledge, and this is the first main aspect of the feminist recovery. So it is important to acknowledge these care services. Another thing, climate justice. If we look at Lebanon, how it became like one big generator, if you could say so. So this pattern cannot continue, and this is clear. Another aspect, and I will stop here, feminist recovery is about acknowledging diversity and acknowledging different identities and acknowledging all forms of diversities, including sexual or gender-related diversity. Is that applicable to our region? Our region is undoubtedly one of the worst regions based on any indicator that we would choose. However, and this is what we have seen during the past year, these forms of resistance uh, are bothering, if you could say so, uh, our ecosystems, our regimes. We cannot but invest in these forms or in these new models. Thank you, Lena. So this is an open call or a general call for mobilization in order to break the current stereotypes or the current status quo. We need structural reforms, and we need a drastic change, a true paradigm shift.